In its plan for a Green Economy 2030, Quebec has committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 37.5% below their 1990 level by 2030. The main GHG emitting sectors in Quebec are transport, with 43% of emissions.
With this in mind, the Quebec government announced in 2020 investments of $15.8 billion as part of the 2020 to 2030 Quebec Infrastructure Plan, PQI. This amount will be devoted to a total of 6 projects in the regions of Montreal, Montérégie, Laval, Capitale-Nationale Quebec, and Outaouais-Gatineau. In total, the government is planning estimated investments in public transit of $43.8 billion, including the possible participation of financial partners. In Quebec City, it plans to invest $3.3 billion in the structuring transport project, namely the tramway, on a new route of 19.3 kilometers, which roughly amounts to $174 million per kilometer. Also in Quebec, the government has just announced the abandonment of the construction of a road tunnel under the river. But he intends to continue the construction of the tunnel reserved solely for public transport. Better known as the Third Link, this project could cost up to $10 billion for a length of 8.3 kilometers, which will amount to $1,205 million per kilometer.
In Montreal, the Caisse de dépôt à placement du Québec, CDPQ, through its subsidiary CDPQ Infra had announced the extension of the Metropolitan Express Network, REM, in the east and north of Montreal and the addition of 23 stations. The total bill for this second phase of the project was estimated at $10 billion, for a length of 32 kilometers, including 25 kilometers in aerial mode and 7 kilometers in underground mode. In this case, this amounted to $312.5 million per kilometer. But in May 2022, the government of Quebec excluded the Caisse de dépôt à placement du Québec from the Réseau Express Metropolitain project, REM, in the east in order to review its governance. The section of the city centre, which was severely criticized, was notably abandoned. Therefore, the City of Montreal and the Government of Quebec are taking the leadership and responsibility for the Eastern REM project, in collaboration with 4 partners who will be responsible for steering it, namely the Regional Transport Authority, ARTM, the Ministry of Transport, the City of Montreal and the Société de Transport de Montréal, STM.
On the south shore of Montreal, the same CDPQ Infra aims to implement an electric mode of public transport in the axes of Taschereau Boulevard and the extension of the Yellow Metro line in Longueuil. In western Gatineau, the tramway project is estimated at more than $3 billion for a planned 26 kilometers route. That is to say a minimum cost of $115 million per kilometer. In all these places, public decision makers have planned for traditional modes of transport on rail, light rail or tram. Several routes of the REM include routes at height on massive concrete infrastructures. Currently priority is given to the vehicle. Everyone is fighting for their light rail in Montreal, Laval, the south shore of Montreal, their tramway in Quebec and Gatineau, their road tunnel in Lévis or their metro stop at the Hôtel de Ville in Montreal. In short, we put the cart before the horse. What you have to do is analyze the needs and give importance to the objective and not to the vehicle. Then ask the question, which vehicle would best meet the identified needs? It's been difficult financing the $600 million to complete the REM tunnel at Dorval Airport. Just with this sum, the COOP MGV could build a suspended monorail that would leave the airport and go to downtown Montreal.
There is an alternative to these modes of transport, the suspended monorail of the COOP MGV. No public decision maker has taken it into account in his decisions. The Co-op MGV is a very Quebec product that stands out from traditional monorails straddling a large concrete beam. A suspended monorail is a monorail whose traction system is placed above the vehicle on a lighter rail.
Suspended monorails have been used for a very long time in several places around the world. The oldest is the Wuppertal monorail in Germany. This suspended monorail has been in operation since 1901, that means for more than 120 years. Today, it still carries passengers, especially tourists. However, its technology has long been surpassed. There are modern suspended monorails in service in several countries. In Germany, besides Wuppertal, there are monorails in Dortmund and Düsseldorf. In China, there is a suspended monorail in Qingdao and Chengdu. And in Japan, in Shonan, in Hiroshima, and in Chiba. Suspended monorails are also in development in Russia. There was even one closer to home in Memphis, the Mud Island monorail. This monorail, which had been in existence since 1982 and made famous in the 1993 film The Firm, had as a special passenger, Tom Cruise. As we can see, suspended monorails are not a pipe dream, a figment of the imagination. Not only are they in service in several places around the world, some for a very long time, but they are used every day by millions of passengers. Thanks to the wheel motor, invented by Dr. Pierre Couture in the 1980s, the main innovation of the Co-op MGV is its speed. In its high-speed version, the Co-op MGV will be able to reach top speeds of 250 km per hour. This would make it possible to cross the distance between Montreal and Quebec in almost an hour. Of course, in urban mode this monorail would be limited to a maximum of 100 km per hour for the comfort of the passengers due to the frequent stops and departures.
The Co-op MGV was founded in October 2013. The Co-op MGV is the first cooperative dedicated, from the start, to technological development. The Co-op MGV wants to create wealth but also to be an example of responsible business. Rooted in its community, it aims to bring together the driving forces of our society around the high-speed monorail project. The goal is to ensure that the company remains in Quebec, that its profits will go first to Quebecers, and that the majority of the spin-offs generated by the project and its industrial partners belong to Quebecers. More recently, the Co-op MGV also proceeded to the founding of an incorporated company in order to open the project to the participation of technological capital and to ensure greater flexibility in the development of certain technological aspects or particular projects.
In April 2013, Radio-Canada's program Découverte produced a report on the suspended monorail promoted at the time by Trans-Quebec. The report described very well the monorail that the Co-op MGV intends to deploy in Quebec. The Co-op MGV has since developed better high-speed technology. Unlike standard electric motors that activate components through gears or transmission shafts, Dr. Pierre Couture's wheel motor involves inserting the electric motor directly into the center of the wheel it activates. A bit like that of an electric bicycle, with the motor attached directly to the hub in the center of the wheel. The wheel and motor are linked to each other directly. The hub of the wheel is also its motor. The wheel thus responds directly to the impulses of the motor. This results in savings in power, volume, and energy. Having no outboard motor, saving volume is very important when it comes to a suspended monorail.
The other great feature of the suspended monorail of the COOP MGV is its double traction mode, using metal and pneumatic. This will allow it to be able to make quick stops and starts and reach its top speed in seconds, while being able to move at high speed. But the many interesting features of the suspended monorail don't stop here.
One of the main advantages of the suspended monorail is that it does not divide the territory. All other rail transport systems have the unfortunate consequence of separating space and blocking the ability to easily cross their footprint. Light trains and streetcars involve rails that often cannot be crossed easily. Crossing them requires the use of level crossings distributed in certain restricted areas. In the case of TGVs, it is absolutely necessary to build viaducts. Level crossings being excluded because of the excessive speed of the train. But this is not only inconvenient for motor vehicles, it is also for pedestrians, pets, livestock, agriculture, and wildlife. These rails are a real tear, although sometimes impassable. When traveling in aerial mode, the monorail travels above road traffic without being affected and without hindering it. It does not separate the territory. Humans and animals can cross it safely. Any collision is impossible. It does not separate the fields and leaves the passage free for agricultural machinery and wild or domestic animals. For the same reason, the suspended monorail does not affect wetlands, their natural flora and fauna.
To build rails, you have to excavate, reorganize the water, electricity and gas pipes, fill them with the appropriate materials, level the ground, lay sleepers, and then the rails themselves. In addition, in the case of electric transport systems, it is necessary to construct catenary support pylons to support the power wires of the light rail or tram. The footprint of these systems requires strips, sometimes raised by a few centimeters, between 7 and 15 meters in width on 10 kilometers long. The monorail only requires pylons spaced 50 to 80 meters apart. Each pylon only needs a footprint of a few square meters, nothing more. No catenaries or overhanging wiring, the power supply being confined with the in-wheel motors in the closed rail. In addition, thanks to this confinement, electrical, telephone or cable services will be able, if necessary, to pass through the monorail rail. Along the route, the rail can be covered with solar panels, which will give it the necessary autonomy in the event of a power failure. This way, passengers will be reassured that they will still be able to get to the next station while waiting for the return of power to the electrical network.
Due to their rigidity and heaviness, light rail and tram systems are forced to carry out numerous expropriations. In 2019, the Quebec government even passed a law to speed up the expropriation process and give itself the necessary leeway to proceed quickly with the construction of public transport networks. The suspended monorail, unlike light trains and trams, does not or requires very little expropriation. The monorail is a light and flexible system. It can easily adapt to the geographical configuration of the place and bypass the biggest obstacles. In some cities, suspended monorails can even simply pass through a building. Unless you build them on elevated routes, light trains or streetcars involve the withdrawal of traffic lanes. Whether it is one or more lanes on a bridge, pedestrian or cycle lanes or lanes for motor vehicles, the train or the tram must sacrifice one or more lanes in order to be able to travel. Because by definition the suspended monorail travels in the third dimension, altitude, not only does it not involve any lane retraction, it also does not interfere with the flow of traffic passing under it. In addition, the monorail itself is not hampered by traffic. The monorail doesn't have to wait at traffic lights. It is never slowed down by traffic jams and is never behind schedule. Even better, the monorail can adjust in real time to needs and demand. Thanks to its flexibility, the monorail system can add shuttles to meet demand at peak times. Thus the system can run additional shuttles at a frequency of 1 shuttle per minute, and reduce the frequency as needed during periods of lower traffic.
Quebec is a Nordic country. Despite global warming, the country still experiences harsh winters and difficult weather conditions. Heavy snow showers with heavy accumulations are the lot of our long winter months. They interrupt or slow down normal traffic, including that of rail transport, which has to deal with the flow of other vehicles. Add to that the ice, the sleet that accumulates on the wires. Rail transport requires heavy and regular maintenance during bad winter weather. Because it travels at height and thanks to its confined rail, unlike traditional rail transport modes, the monorail is absolutely unaffected by bad weather conditions. There are no exterior wires and the track is protected from the elements at all times. The monorail is still able to move forward and is not bothered by slowdowns on the ground caused by inclement weather. Due to its confined rail and guide wheels that rest on the vertical portion of the rail, the monorail cannot derail. No matter the speed, the curves, the winds, the monorail is safe from derailment. This security element is a major asset in its design. Traditional rail modes of transport move on a metal rail with metal wheels. Because of this condition, they cannot cross slopes or drops unless it is done quietly over long distances. Because the suspended monorail has a pneumatic traction mode, it can go up and down hills as easily as any light or heavy motor vehicle. Even better, the fact that the pavement is wet, icy, or snowy does not bother it at all. Its rail is confined and it is sheltered from all these weather conditions.
In most cases, the monorail, due to its flexibility, does not require the construction of additional viaducts or tunnels. If an obstacle presents itself on the route, the monorail can bypass or overcome it. All you have to do is lay the support pylons accordingly, raise or shorten them, and the monorail spins as if nothing had happened. An economy in the development of this mode of transport and an additional aesthetic advantage. Another advantage of the monorail is that it is quite possible to hook up your rail to existing infrastructure. If a ditch, a stream, even the river presents itself, it is quite conceivable to hook the monorail to an existing bridge or viaduct. So, no additional infrastructure and economies of scale on its installation. And if that weren't already good enough, the best part about this design is that the monorail, by hanging in a cantilever, over or under the existing infrastructure, does not remove any lanes of traffic. While the traffic continues as usual and the vehicles are not aware of anything, the passengers of the monorail enjoy a privileged view of the landscape outside. Safely. The monorail does not require any particular technology. All the elements necessary for its implementation already exist in one form or another. You just need to put them together in the optimal way to make them a cutting-edge mode of transport. All these elements can thus be assembled in a factory right here in Quebec, creating an industry, high-tech jobs for Quebecers and outlets all over the world. The monorail will quickly become a national pride and another flagship of our know-how. Need we remind you that the REM trains are built in India while factories in Quebec specializing in the construction of train and metro cars operate at low speed and have to lay off workers?
The great advantage of factory manufacturing is that building the monorail is a simple game of mechanics. All you have to do is dig the foundations for the pylons and lay them. All other elements, including the shuttles, can be transported on site and assembled in record time. In doing so, the irritants caused by the ground layout of rail transport are eliminated. Construction of the monorail will cause minimal disruption to the environment and to the movement of other vehicles. And as wherever possible, it will be located in the middle of or between the traffic lanes of the main boulevards or highways. The disturbances due to its construction will be practically nil.
Of course, to allow the disembarkation and entry of new passengers, it will be necessary to build stations along the routes of the monorail. Private companies have shown interest in developing a concept of multi-service stations. This would involve fitting out buildings in which there would obviously be a boarding platform, but also in the main lobby various shops and everyday services, grocery store, bakery, cafe, hairdresser, bank counter, etc. One floor could be dedicated to a daycare service where parents leaving for work could drop off their children and pick them up at the end of the day. One or more other floors could provide parking for motor vehicles. In addition, the stations can also serve as an intermodal interface. Not only will they be able to connect through secure gateways to certain stations of other modes of transport such as the metro, the REM, or the tram, but they can also offer the rental of electric vehicles, cars or bicycles, or as a station for the Bixi in Montreal. The big advantage of the suspended monorail is its speed and comfort. The shuttles will be fully automated. They will not require a driver. At most, one flight attendant will be able to meet the specific needs of travelers. The seats will be thought out and designed for optimal comfort. The shuttles will provide all cutting-edge technological services, Wi-Fi connection, charging sockets or induction charging of electronic devices, catalogs of films or shows, power station, toilets, and access adapted for disabled people. And above all, a journey without interruptions caused by traffic or bad weather. And a panoramic view of the urban or rural landscape which will pass under the passengers.
Let's recap. The Eastern Montreal REM will cost around $312.5 million per kilometer. The Quebec tramway costs roughly $145 million per kilometer. Gatineau and Ottawa tramways around $115 million per kilometer. In December 2010, the Institut de Recherche en Économie Contemporaine, IREC, published a study which established with a very conservative estimate that the construction costs for a first line of high-speed monorail in an interurban area would at that time be around $12 million per kilometer, which included the studies and the development of a prototype. In 2023, within the framework of an implementation of the system in an urban environment, the assumption of an updated cost, still conservative, brings us to a cost between $25 and $35 million per kilometer. This cost remains significantly lower than the costs of other current transit systems. That is to say, between 3 and 10 times less expensive than the systems projected in the main cities of Quebec. For example, in Quebec City, with the $3.3 billion allocated to the tramway project, instead of covering 19.3 kilometers as planned with the tramway, the monorail could cover 100 kilometers on the North Shore, cross the river and cover about 30 kilometers to Cégep-de-Lévis. The monorail could thus play the role of third link and save around $10 billion in the construction of a tunnel between Lévis and Quebec. In Gatineau, switching to the suspended monorail instead of the streetcar would not only avoid congestion in the traffic lanes, but would save $2.6 billion. In Montreal, the adoption of the suspended monorail would save $9 billion for the east and north phase of the REM. Not to mention the much less visual impact. The project of a high-speed train, TGV, between Montreal and Toronto, possibly as far as Windsor in Ontario, is resurfacing. Some would prefer a high-frequency rail, HFR, for reasons of lower cost. A high-speed monorail between Windsor and Quebec would not only be as fast as a TGV, but it would cost 3 to 10 times less. And, above all, he would not divide the territory along his route.
After all this list of considerable advantages, why is the monorail not, de facto, the mode of transport favored by public decision makers? It can certainly be argued that the suspended monorail system suffers from a number of prejudices among policymakers and the news media. As there is not currently many suspended monorail system in North America, France and England, executives and the media have no point of comparison in their usual cultural circle of references. On the other hand, from there to feed a certain disinformation, there is something of the order of lack of will or bad faith. Would a few lobbies, benefiting from a lot of influence with public decision makers or the media, have an interest in demolishing or ridiculing the suspended monorail project simply because it risks competing with them? Could it be that they don't want to see the system land on their playing field? One can only imagine that there is a great deal of ignorance in the fact that the suspended monorail project is not taken with the seriousness and consideration it deserves. On the one hand, whether we do it on purpose or not, we have the unfortunate habit of confusing traditional monorails with suspended monorails. Traditional monorails are usually straddled on a large concrete beam. They are much more massive and less flexible than suspended monorails. Suspended monorails, like the one promoted by COOP MGV, are hung under a rail and travel on either side of a concrete or metal pylon. They are much lighter in appearance and more flexible in their layout and configuration. There are several quite modern and contemporary suspended monorail systems in use around the world for a long time. As they are in service in Germany, China, or Japan, we can admit that they are quite far and especially outside our usual comparison area. But today, with all the digital tools in the planes that can take us to the four corners of the world in a matter of hours, can we really continue to pretend we've never heard of suspended monorails? One of the main arguments used to de facto discredit the suspended monorail was its alleged ugliness, which would make this means of transport wrong to disfigure the urban landscape wherever it circulates. First of all, it should absolutely be noted that the COOP MGV cares just as much as any citizen or public policymaker about the visual impact of their monorail. It was never a question for the COOP MGV to take his monorail through a heritage or historic area. COOP is keen to meet with public decision makers and discuss with them the best routes so that the monorail optimally meets transport needs and does so with a minimum of visual impact. On the other hand, the concepts of beauty and ugliness are highly subjective and vary over time. Many people shouted in the 19th century when Gustave Eiffel presented his tower project for the Universal Exhibition in Paris. Some protested that this horrible tower would disfigure Paris for centuries to come. We know the rest of the story. The Eiffel Tower has long since become the brand image of Paris, and no one ever talks about its visual impact anymore. On the contrary, Paris accommodation with a view of the Eiffel Tower simply sees their value swell. The COOP MGV will scrupulously study the visual appearance of the pylons and its shuttles. There are endless styles that can be adopted depending on the location for the construction of future monorail routes. Monorail pylons are not limited to concrete alone and can just as easily be constructed of metal. The only limit of shapes and styles is the imagination. Pylons can be dressed in 1,001 ways. Classic, Greco-Roman, Renaissance, New France, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, 60s, modern, contemporary, futuristic, vegetal, arboreal or floral. Finally, it is a little dishonest to decry and tear your shirt because of the supposed ugliness of a possible suspended monorail and at the same time to be silent and accept without saying anything the frankly massive and hideous aspect of the REM which is currently under construction. Already, we can observe in several places, notably in Brossard along Highway 10, in Pointe Saint-Charles and from Ile-de-Sort to the Central Station, how gigantic the infrastructures of the REM are, obstructing and completely crush the urban landscape. The REM development project in East Montreal will involve the construction of 25 kilometers of elevated trains. The REM will run on a huge raised concrete slab in certain places in the heart of Montreal, in both directions with a dedicated railway line in each direction. And on top of the train cars, it is necessary to add pylons and catenary lines to supply the locomotives.
One thing is certain, the COOP MGV will have much less visual impact than the REM juggernaut. For example, instead of taking René-Lévesque Boulevard, the suspended monorail could very well run over the Ville-Marie autoroute between Vigia Avenue and Saint-Antoine to continue on Notre Dame East. What the SDPQ Infra SLR cannot do because it requires too heavy and massive an infrastructure. It could start at the Place d'Armes metro station and continue its journey via Notre Dame to the eastern end of the island, which would cause minimal visual impact.
The COOP MGV urban monorail is also in REM, a metropolitan express network. And it is not in competition with any of the structuring transport projects proposed either by the government, cities like Quebec or Gatineau, or by the Caisse de dépôt et placements. On the contrary, the COOP MGV subscribes to and supports all transport projects aimed at improving the fluidity of commuting, reducing the use of self-driving and greenhouse gas emissions. What the COOP MGV offers, it's just a better vehicle for all of these projects. A vehicle that is more flexible, lighter, less massive, more efficient, less bulky, requiring less expropriation, which does not remove traffic lanes, which protects pedestrians, other vehicles and domestic and wild animals. And as if that weren't enough already, a much cheaper transport model to implement.
The COOP MGV offers a system that will elevate transportation technology in Quebec to an unparalleled dimension. This monorail could become another symbol of our know-how, another brand image. The monorail will be able to be exported to several countries around the world that have already expressed their interest. But for all of this to happen, you have to risk the first time. You have to give your project a chance to come to life. As long as we decide to go only for a traditional solution and don't have the audacity to embark on what is unfortunately considered an uncertain adventure, the monorail is bound to stand still. The monorail is being asked to prove itself, but it is not allowed to do so. It's good to want to be pragmatic. But if we just opt for conservative and ordinary solutions, there is no progress. And it causes more harm, more visual scars, more expropriations, more obstructions to traffic. The worst thing is that the result of this technological conservatism is a much greater burden on public finances, and ultimately on the taxpayer. You have to have the courage to innovate. Innovation is the only way forward. If you consider, like us, that the monorail is a means of transport of the future and an innovative solution to transport problems, we invite you to become a member of COOP MGV by visiting our website mgv.coop. Or our Facebook page, Monorail COOP MGV. You can also contribute in large numbers to the I Buy My Manometer campaign by visiting our webpage or our Facebook page. The COOP MGV needs your support. Support the idea? Share our publications? Talk to those around you? Become a member of COOP MGV? Participate? And join us in developing this great project for Quebec society.